Okay, good evening. This is Ramon from Bold Like a Leopard, and we are going to talk about one of the topics that I don't care how far they bury it in the media. I care about it. You should care about it. If you use oil in your car, if you care about any of the topics that have to do with Latin America and our economy and what's going on with the world and currencies, Venezuela. This is Testigo Venezuela. I have Carlos Cordova, one of my usual guests here, and we're going to talk about a really sexy subject today: debt restructuring. Unfortunately, or
Yay.
debt defaulting. Um, Venezuela is currently going through one of the most colossal debt crises of modern times. So I did want to have Gabriel on about this. He wasn't available tonight. He's very into Dollar Today and that website. Carlos, what is
Fuck that website, dude. Come on.
so there you go. What is your opinion on this? I've seen reports that it hasn't actually defaulted. Venezuela hasn't actually defaulted, but
No.
they're going through some sort of restructure.
So, just to give an intro to what's happening now, uh, a lot of reports are misleading right now with what's happening in Venezuela. What really happened a couple of days ago was that they defaulted on one of their payments. It was about $200 million on their payments. Again, I think their debt is 200 billion or something like that. We have to check that, but it only defaulted on the first payment, right? And a lot of
Mhm.
people are calling it as the whole country defaulted. No, this is what it's. There's a term for it. I think it's partial default or a elemental default. I forgot what the term is, but a lot of people are taking the S&P statement as a complete default, and that's not true. There's a so what's happened now in the next 30 days, there are a number of debt that are due. A lot of payments are due, and there's a lot of speculation since this first payment was not basically paid, and there's a speculation about complete default on the country. Right now there is only 200 million debt defaulted. There has been some restructuring done with China, which is holds about 23% of its debt. There's been some restructuring with Russia, which holds about $3.1 billion of his debts. It's a very small portion, but I guess there's some restructuring going on. So no, it hasn't been completely defaulted yet, but it seems that the trend is going that way.
Okay, so I mentioned Dollar Today. Dollar Today, for those of you that don't know, is this website that is mainly used by a lot of speculators on currencies in Venezuela, and it's generally used to track the price of the dollar as opposed to the bolivar, which is the currency of Venezuela. Why do you say that you don't think it's a reliable tracker for that?
Because it's obviously overinflated. It's. I mean, if you look at it, if you look at the trend of inflation, looking at dollar today, it's you have to take into account. I think we talked about it before. You have to take into account the amount of numerous movements around the financial sector, and then make your conclusions. And you yourself can find out if they are actually on a somewhat reasonable path of inflation, or are they overestimating it? And of course, I don't think that the fixed price of the government is right either. I mean, those are extremely underinflated, right? You have a complete fantasy as an exchange coming from the government. So obviously, I'm not saying the government fixed rate is correct, but this dollar today thing, it's completely overinflated. I mean, you have to take a look at day-to-day changes, and take a look at this, and at the same time take a look at the financial sector movements, and you will find out numerous cases where there's no reason for it to be inflated from one day to another. Again, I think obviously there's an inflation going on, there's a hyperinflation going on, but the rate at what dollar today is going, it's fucking ridiculous. So if we're going to have a conversation about the fantasy of underinflating a fixed price by the government, and say that that's a fantasy, then you must also take some time and study the trends of dollar today, and you will find the same conclusion, that it's also a fantasy. So it's all somewhere in between, something in between what dollar today has, and something between what basically the zero floor of Venezuela. So I think there is an inflation, but I think people are too lazy to look into the movements of the market, and do study on how dollar today has been reacting over the years. I mean, it's completely overinflated, and
So
it's sad.
are you saying it's kind of like a sensation? Because I have on the screen some of their
Yeah,
headlines,
right.
and are you saying it's kind of sensationalist? Because if you look at the one I'm pointing at, it says devaluation, inflation, and scarcity.
Yeah,
The worst is still to come.
yeah,
The Venezuelan economy, chronic sickness,
right.
but nothing's inaccurate there. It's just, it's one of those headlines where they just go and they try to
Well,
grab you with the story. But
well,
are
they
you saying that this is like creating kind of a mass hysteria as far as the currency when they peg these rates and start just going wild with them?
there is a level of inflation that we completely have to acknowledge, right? And it's hyperinflation, no kidding, but not at the rate, like you said. And yes, this is actually the question. Not at the rate the dollar today has done. I'm sure, because I've seen it time and time again. Uh, you know, changes of 50%, 100%, 200% that are ridiculous in any in any metric, by any metric. So there is inflation, but what this dollar today is doing, it's completely overinflating, completely sensationalizing, and creating an even bigger problem that already is. We already have a problem of overinflation, but this is completely exacerbating it. It's just completely taking a problem and just inflating it, just lighting it, like letting into flames and let it completely burn. That's why I don't like it. It's just a completely sensational. It's a hyper inflated rate, and whoever thinks that that's a reliable rate is not doing its homework.
So if you're just joining us, I have Carlos Cordova here. This is Testigo Venezuela, episode 8. And we're talking about Venezuela possibly in the future defaulting on its foreign debts. What happened was that they did miss a debt repayment that was supposed to have happened, I think, yesterday.
Yeah,
Therefore, there is generally kind of a half panic going on. Standards and Poor's, which is one of the leading financial markets in the world, they've downgraded one of their bond ratings. I think I'm going to get to Moody's later, which is also downgraded their credit rating. What's the mood? You've been speaking to people in the country or outside. What's the mood among the people based on this? Has this changed their outlook on what's going to be happening with the regime and everything, or is it basically business as usual?
it's just the same old, same old. I mean, we've seen I think what this when we talk about foreign debt and we talk about default, I don't think people really understand yet. I mean, right now it's just at the beginning stages. Uh, so I think right now it's a lot of expectations on their side. But what matters to Venezuelan people is, it's not really the foreign debt, but it's like, am I gonna put food on the table? Am I gonna get paid? I'm gonna get paid tomorrow. How long is my salary gonna last me this month? Am I gonna eat dinner tonight? That's those are the kind of questions they're asking themselves.
So I have a question from Dade Murphy, who I've been on his stream before. He says, have you seen the video Venezuela about to default on his debt? Well, Sticks Hexenhammer, who's the person who was cited,
Yeah,
has been talking about it for a long time, and he does have pretty good tracking of the crisis. But I think he also said that it's about to go into total default. I don't that's not really the way it works, and I think what's really the problem here. the way I think about it is it's as if you're paying off your, let's say your jet ski or whatever it is, and you have all these payments to make, and you just keep missing them, and then the bill collectors are coming. Well, that's the stage that they're in, and they've been to some degree in that stage for a while. Except in this case, it affects their ability to take out more foreign loans. So, as far as Venezuela and its friendly states, such as Ecuador and Iran and Cuba and Russia and China, what do you think's the outlook? Will they continue to lend money? I did see we're going to talk about Russia. There's already been news about that. But what do you think the outlook is? Do you think that they'll continue to trust Venezuela to honor its debts?
Well, the Chinese seems to be okay with them. The Chinese and the Russians seem to be happy to keep loaning to them. Obviously, right now there's sanctions. We saw that a couple months ago about they cannot take any new debt from the United States in financial institutions, but they still have some outstanding debts to take. So we already see the answer to your question. They're deciding not to do it, at least from the U.S. side. And I know there's movements on the European side to do something similar. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So we have Forbes released this article. It said Venezuela did not default, but risks remain. It says the widely reported story of a
Right.
default in Venezuela missed one key payment. It really did
Right.
not default on over $1 billion in principal and interest payments. So it goes on to say that they have been mailing. If you own Venezuelan bonds, which I guess I kind of have a audience that I think those are more like lottery ticket people. No
Yeah.
offense, guys, but I don't think that they invest in Venezuelan bonds. But it says that they have been mailing out, I guess, yield for those bonds. So it's not as if you have to panic yet. But it says here the
Right.
Venezuelan government displays limited transparency in the administration and use of government managed funds. How about that, Carlos? Did you know that? As well as in as in fiscal operations, which poses challenges to accurately assessing its fiscal state and the full financial strength of the sovereign. And PDVSA, for those of you that don't know, PDVSA is Petroleos de Venezuela, SA, which is the state oil conglomerate in Venezuela. And PDVSA displays similar characteristics. So what's the difference here in terms of the structure? Because I know that the Venezuelan government as a whole issues bonds and PDVSA does. Which one is then the worst state, in your opinion?
The who? The PDVSA or the government? Is that what you
Or,
mean?
yeah,
Well, it's a hard question, right?
it is a
Uh,
hard
it,
question. It
it's
would be
it's
nice if there was some transparency, man.
well, this is the
You know,
thing, up
the
until
people's councils are supposed to be open to the people, right?
the funny thing that there's a ministry called the Ministry of Truth and Truth and Transparency or something like that in Venezuela. So I don't know why they don't do it. But I mean, but going back to your question, I mean, they were PDVSA was hiding their quarterly earnings for the longest time until recently and they were forced to show it because they needed to make some payments, and they did. They actually paid some of his debts. I don't know how much of it, but I know there's a good portion of it was paid recently. So like Forbes saying, exactly, that's exactly what I said at the beginning, is like they didn't default. It's just a one key payment, and it could be the start, the domino effect, that could be the first domino in the many other dues that they have in the next 30 days. And that's why the news is coming out now.
So I think the best way to interpret it is this, okay? It's almost as if you're gambling right now as to whether you're going to be paid or somebody else is going to be paid if you own a Venezuelan bond note. And this paragraph kind of explains this. It says that the selective default was expected. It says Fernando Pertini, an offshore money manager running Millennia Asset Management, now based in Costa Rica. I'm assuming that he used to be in Venezuela. Venezuela is no longer a passive high-yield carry trade with low cash prices for longer-rated bonds. You're getting sufficient defensive characteristics priced in. If typical recovery value is in the 30s and you add a strong backstop and support from Russia and China with strategic oil reserves as collateral, you have just enough cushion. If these bonds go into the 20s, So they're depending on basically a couple of things. They're depending on China and Russia to funnel in some of their own money, as well as for PDVSA's, um, I guess, their profits to be able to their profits from whatever oil sales are going to be happening in the near future to defray some of those costs. But I don't think that they can guarantee to all the bondholders that they're going to get their yield.
Right.
So let me ask you a question. To get away from the numbers and the accounting shit. What do you think that the issue with PDVSA? I've discussed it with Gabriel. I've discussed it with, I think, both you and Juan Carlo. Do you think that they're gonna ever be able to restructure themselves as a company in order to serve Venezuela? As I can see, you're already skeptical, but that the economy is completely dependent on one company right now, and they know that they are up to bat in order to help their country. Do you think that with the help of Russia and China, PDVSA could save Venezuela?
The funny thing is that people think Venezuela, like PDVSA, it's doing well, but well, but it's not. Right now, what you have is, well, first of all, a lot of the main oil reserves they already sold it to different companies. Eni, it's one of the companies, an Italian oil company that owns like 30% of the biggest. There's these sections of Venezuela. I don't know how you call it, but these oil sections in one of the biggest rivers called the Orinoco River, and they part of the debt payments that they had to make with the ENI was to actually give them rights to extract oil from that section, and it was about like 40% or 30% of the reserves, and you see that more and more where instead of getting payment. Instead of paying what they need to pay to these companies, they're starting to sell the reserves. So the basically reserves that haven't been explored and haven't been extracted are now owned by Exxon and Eni and one more. I think Chevron and Eni owns about like 35% of oil reserves in Venezuela. And that's a big chunk. Thinking about like that Venezuela has the biggest reserves in the world. So going back to PDVSA, I mean you see now there are reports that they only have about 22 rigs in production, and they used to have up to 50 in production. Like you're down by 50%. You're already in a downward spiral. So as it looks right now, it doesn't look good as far as repayments to the U.S. But I think you already see coziness, you already see openness from the Chinese and the Russians to do, but they don't own that much debt from Venezuela either. So it's I mean they own about like what 20 something percent of the Venezuelan debt. What we're talking about, we're speculating here mostly. I think we should kind of focus on what's going to happen to all those debts that are due to U.S. financial institutions, because China already, there's an article about it. China already said that they're going to restructure the debt, and they agreed to some terms on the debt already with Venezuela. So they're already open to it. You saw openness with Russia, so that helps, but that it's not enough. They have to find another way to do these little things. Another thing is that I know people in Venezuela right now, and they say that there's no activity, there's no new activity, there's no much of exploration, there's not much of investment on new oil rigs or expanding production. Things are stalled, and I think part of it is the exchange rate with the government, the fact that they are very chasty about giving out dollars, the fact that you have inflation on one side, and then the fact that you have all these sanctions coming in on the top people on these companies. So
Well,
that's what we have.
I think Dade brought up Styx Hexenhammer, who has made videos in the past where he talks about one of the worst mistakes that Chavez made when he was president was make not just to make Venezuela's economy much more dependent on oil by scaring off a lot of these other enterprises, but also he never updated and upgraded the oil drilling technology and refinery technology and infrastructure in Venezuela. So essentially what you're seeing is this structurally obsolete and to some degree maybe in the future dangerous neglected system of oil drilling in Venezuela. Do you think that, I mean, you talk to people over there, are they feeling that this is kind of the beginning of the end of their country being an independent state? Because this essentially means that we're seeing the results of Venezuela being mortgaged to all of these foreign countries, and they're just going to have to keep giving more and more and more until there's nothing left.
Yeah, well, they already have had elections a couple of days ago. They're dealing with a different problem right now. I think before they even think about they're going to be finally done with the government, there's a whole other issue, and we can do a whole video about this with the opposition parties.
Well, you could share in that. It doesn't have to be just about the debt today.
Yeah, but like the thing is that coming from the Venezuelan people, I think there is a bigger issue now, and there is a certain level of discontent with the uh, alternative. With the hey,
The mood.
with the no, with the alternative. What's the alternative, right? If Maduro goes out, what happens? That's the question. And he said, are you going to turn it into the military? And it's the same people. I mean, they already kind of cleaned that slate for them already. So if you go to the military, it's the same people. If you go to the opposition, who are you going to choose? I mean, you have right now the opposition party is fractured after the elections, and I mean, again, I can go on and on and on for hours, but basically, what's happening right now that we cannot talk about the end of things for the current government if the alternative doesn't seem to be solid. I mean, the alternative is all over the place. The alternative did not win elections. We can talk about fraud and all these things, but the fact is that they did not win elections, and they lost a bunch of governorships, and now they're going into regional elections. So the alternative doesn't look good. So before we even talk about okay, what's going to happen when if they ever default, I don't think anything's going to happen right now, given the fact that the people that should be coming with solutions are not in touch with the people. Kind of reminds me of the Democratic Party.
Well,
They're
yeah,
not in
yeah.
touch with the people. So
That's a funny. The Democratic Party comes to mind a bit, but the parallel that we should probably bring up today is Zimbabwe over in southern Africa. Just had a military coup today,
right,
and they were going through a lot of the same issues that Venezuela is going through today 15 years ago, and it's taken until now for anything nearing a change to happen. We don't even know what's going to happen.
right,
Could be that like Carlos says, when you have a totalitarian or near totalitarian state, which Venezuela is headed towards, and you have the people at the top. First of all, the people around Maduro, like Tarek al-Aissami and what's that name? Delcy Rodriguez.
yeah,
Delcy, yeah. These people. Let's say you remove one person at the top. Well, then you get one of his stooges, one of his clones at the
you
top.
have
Or
you
one of
have
these.
yeah,
Yeah, it's an oligarchy.
you have to remember, yeah, it's an oligarchy, and it's funny. It's funny because it's a socialist oligarchy. It's kind of funny, but you have to remember these people are good at politics. They're good at politics. They're better than their opponents. Are good at politics, and they have managed to stay. There's a reason why they're in power, and one of the main reasons is because they are good in politics. Like they've been managing the Supreme Court after they lost the parliament. They've been managing all these executive powers on Nicolas Maduro for the longest time, even before Chavez was in power. They've been managing the elections. I mean, where they drive to people's houses and take them to the polls. I mean, these people are, if they're good at something, they're good
Keeping
at
power.
elections and keeping power, and that's
Yeah.
basically that's why they are where they are.
Well,
So
that's exactly what. That's why I compared it to Zimbabwe. By the way, Zimbabwe, it's conceptually harder to stay in power in Zimbabwe because it's a multi-ethnic state. There's the Shona in the north, I think the Shona in the north, and then the Ndebele are in the south. Two different African people, making up Zimbabwe. What Robert Mugabe did over the years was he basically just bullied people, shot their families, and kicked them out of the country, and stole white people's farms, stole black people's property. Basically, he bullied his way through all the opposition until he became an absolute dictator. And
Right.
and I think in Venezuela it's not quite as bad because I guess you don't see people getting shot all the time, but they do get shot, which is
Well,
so okay.
they
That's a
don't
gray
need
area.
they don't
It's
need
a
to get shot. They are prosecuted politically, you know, and they spend 15 years in jail. I mean, it's well, what's worse, you know, pick your poison kind of stuff. So
yeah, and this is what I'm saying about the parallel with Zimbabwe, just like with Chavez and Maduro. Mugabe edged out all of his rivals and potential opposition over his time as president. And when there was an opposition, very much like happened in with the MUD, the Democratic Unity Movement in Venezuela, he would basically manipulate them and hang kind of a carrot in front of them and say, "Hey, there's elections. You could win parliament or something." Then they'd win parliament. He'd take away all its power. It's
yeah,
pretty much the same model. And by the way, he based it off of Mao's China, where and not exactly to a T, but he based it off this idea that you always try to concentrate power in as small of a
and
body as possible.
you know, Raul, one counter argument that you hear from people here in the United States talking about socialism and talking about communism is that no, that's not in the hands of the powerful. They have communes and they have these groups where people vote and things. And what I will tell with that, what I will tell them all the time is like, go ahead and go to communes and if you are against some of the policies, try to be in a commune and see how long you last. You know, it's a complete control of the party in even in the communes where they own their own party members will kick out people that don't agree with them. So this is a facade of political you know, political participation. They call it participatory democracy,
Yeah,
but it's a facade.
my mom and some of my uncles and aunts have lived on communes in the past, and it sounds like the worst bullshit in the. I actually did live on one, not as a member, but it's a bunch of bullshit because if you think that freedom is having the people make decisions, well, once the people make a decision to wear a uniform or to shovel manure or something, and you say, "Well, I don't like shoveling manure," and they're like, "Oh, Mister Not Shoveling Manure guy thinks he's so fancy." That's kind of their attitude.
Yeah.
That
It's they will bully you into agreeing with them, and if you don't agree with them, I mean, there is people there's already this is recorded. I mean, there's a couple of documentaries that talks about this. There was a guy that was working on a sugar factory. You probably saw this documentary also. He was working on a sugar factory, and I think he was one of the managers in the sugar factory. And when the crisis started, they changed the head of the sugar factory to a professor, a university professor.
I
And
saw some of this. Yeah,
you saw some of this, right?
yeah,
So just people that haven't seen it. So what happened is like they changed the management to the economics professor from a socialist university, and they mismanaged the company, and the company went down, right? And people were laid off. They basically didn't have no more business and stuff. When he was going to the communes, he was part of the communes, and he was part of these groups. So people say, "Oh, it's not the government; it's participatory democracy." My ass, right? So they go in there, and he goes and complains about it, and he finds out that the next day he's not part of the commune anymore. You know? So
yeah.
come on, enough with this claim that communes is something. It's a fantasy where people come in and discuss ideas. When in reality, when you see stuff, people talk about like theoretical Marxism and all these things. It's like, okay, well, we can talk about theories. That's fine. I can talk about theories all day, but I like to talk about facts. I would talk about like how is this actually implemented. And this is what happens. They're not going to let people that don't disagree with them be part of the communes. Come on, don't be, you know, who in the right mind having the power to change things at that level? It's gonna let people discuss ideas that disagree with them. They're not going to discuss ideas disagree with. If they disagree with them, then they're going to be part of the commune. I mean, come on.
Well, I think there's an interesting, I'm going to mention comments in a second, but there's an interesting question I've kind of been holding back for a few months because for those of you who don't know, Carlos Cordova, he's a progressive, supported the Sanders campaign last year. A pretty open-minded guy. He's not a Heritage Foundation plant or something, right?
No.
You're not. I mean, I haven't asked him, but I'm assuming you're not.
No.
And has this undermined some of your beliefs in these socialist ideologies, or do you think it's that they just have gone way too overboard? I mean, yeah.
One rule I have a personal rule I have for myself. I don't talk about ideology. I talk about policy, right? So when we talk of the problem, and you see this problem in the web a lot when you talk about socialism and communism and stuff like that, is that people get tangled with terms, and people have different meanings for the same term, and then people just get in these fights that don't go anywhere. Nobody learns anything, and nobody talks about any policies. It's just theories and then some rebuttals. And you see this not only on individuals, but also on channels, in conservative channels, using the same thing. It's like, oh, socialist is a term. It's a complete waste of time. It's like, what do you mean socialist? What do you mean? Do you mean the participatory democracy that fails in Venezuela? Do you mean Scandinavian socialism? Do you mean France? Do you mean Germany? What do you mean? What do you mean socialism? So I don't talk about the term socialism. I talk about policies, the policies that work, and then we can have a discussion. So when we talk about Venezuela, when we talk about socialism in Venezuela, we can talk about specific situations like the communes, right? Does that work? Completely not. And I never thought that they would work, but I've seen it not working, right? Do I think that the government should take over? Well, not take over, but should the government regulate certain industries for the betterment of the people? It's not a yes or no question. It's more about like, has this been done before? Has it been proven to be right? Can this work? And then, okay, what can you do to make it work in a certain country? In this case, in Venezuela. What are the in this case in the US, for example, what are the lessons learned from other countries that we can take on and learn from, and then adapt it to a specific country? It's not a, just like the free market ideology. It's not like a be all end all thing. It's more nuanced than that. And what happens a lot is that people get entangled with these ideas, and I understand that, because it's a good political lever, because you can just lead your people with ideas, and then the people get embellished. But once you get down to it, you just gotta have a honest conversation. Where are situations where certain policies, socialist policies, have worked? Why they have worked? What are the relationship with capitalism? Have they completely to get rid of capitalism? Have they worked with capitalism? A good example is China. Look at China. I mean, you have a situation where they created a capitalist heaven in one of their districts. What's it called? Shenzai, I think it's called.
Shenzhen.
Where Shenzhen, people. I encourage people to go read it about Shenzhen and what is it, and why are they so successful. There is some good capitalism, I guess, being done there. They made the classes thriving, But then at the same time, they claim themselves to be, the Communist Party is actually ruling. So then you have, okay, is that so then you go to the forums, and then you go to people and you say, okay, is that communism working? Is that real communism? So again, as I said, like policies, right? So what did they do in Shenzai? What are things that work and don't work? And that's kind of my ideology in a way.
Well, I've seen that when I try to see conservatism, the problem with me is that too often people want to start with the social conservatism, which, to be honest with you, people don't give a shit about. Like average people don't care about friggin' single motherhood, or I mean, people do care about abortion, but I figured out that when I have an idea, let's say when I have issues where I say, well, Medicaid is not a great idea for a program, it's unsustainable. Well, the way to go about that is not to shame people who are on Medicaid, because people need to live within the system that they have. So then I just explain why Medicaid long term will be a problem, that it's a system that could collapse if the government mismanages it, which it is. And then you work from there. You kind of, instead of attacking the person, you attack the the flaws that you see in it, and
Yeah.
you don't like try to be judgmental. And as opposed to, we have in the chat, I was kind of holding back for the right moment. We have Augusto Pinochet. I'll continue reading his comments as long as he doesn't disappear me, which has happened before to various people. But he said he does have a question, which I'll read that question last. But he says Trinidad and Tobago are an interesting side note to the Venezuelan story. Now, I don't know what he means by that. I think it's, they do have an oil economy in Trinidad. I'm not sure exactly what he means. And he says Rhodesia is back, baby, about Venezuela. Well,
Okay.
I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
So sorry to tell you, but that's going to be a real problem to bring about,
Well,
because
I'm sure. I'm
we're
sure
going to need people
Pinochet.
for that.
I'm sure Pinochet would root for that, right?
Yeah, from beyond the grave.
Yeah.
It's not that, I mean, we're not that far removed from Halloween. Then he says, I listen to the words of Marx, Stalin, Lenin, Mao, Castro, Che, Pol Pot, Hitler, and Mussolini described socialism and communism, but maybe it'll work with this time. Well, I think Carlos explained it. He's not trying to say that he's a socialist. He's trying to say that there are areas where he believes that government intervention is necessary. And that doesn't, like, again, a lot of us, I could frame myself as a conservative and throw footballs at the screen like Sean Hannity, and my ideas could still suck if I call myself a conservative. But and the same with him, Carlos. I mean, he's a person with progressive ideas, but he doesn't go and just wave around flags and wear masks and stuff and fight with people in Austin. I think that there's a place in the world for people with a different perspective. Apparently, it's not in 1980s Chile, as Mr. Pinochet would say. Where were we? I mean, let's get back to Venezuela. The crisis with the hunger has been ongoing. How is it affected by events like this? This default is really more on the side of the economy as a whole. Do you
Yeah.
think that the situation already hit rock bottom before, and that this really isn't having any an effect on that?
Every day we find a new how do you call it, bottom, rock bottom. It's like when we think we're there, we find another rock bottom. With the food situation, one thing needs to be mentioned here for the sake of fairness. The government has been trying lately to, in a they've been trying to do what any totalitarian and a good government would try to do, which is they would try to control a certain section of the supply, right? And they've been trying. They right now got new importations from Russia. Some rice got delivered to Venezuela, and they're gonna distribute it to a certain portion of the country, and the only ones receiving it are going to be those with something called Carnet de la Patria, which is a special ID that you have to get from the government to get some benefits. Again, another example that it's not the government for everybody. Another example, right? So they're trying to, so they're getting some type of, maybe they bought it from Russia, maybe they got donated to alleviate the situation in Venezuela. I don't know how. I mean, again, I don't think that's sustainable at all. I think that's probably gonna make some people eat for a couple months and that's it. Uh, but there is a will there. I just don't think the methods are right.
Well, I think personally that what's going on is President Maduro has conceded and given up on the idea of Venezuela being an independent country. And he's figured out that he's seen President Assad, who's able to continue to live his lifestyle in Syria. And I'm not saying that the alternative is better. I'm not saying ISIS would be better than Assad, but he's able to live a comfortable life surrounded by his cronies and bodyguards and all that, as long as Russia keeps him in power. And he's fine, basically, again, mortgaging off the future of his country. Now, I wish we could have a couple other opinions here but nobody else answered today besides you, and I think Gabriel said he's available some other day.
Yep.
We'll see. We'll see if it happens. But do you think that the prospect of Venezuela having a successful independent country, they're being put into crisis by Maduro, because even if he were to fall now, these are commitments that Venezuela has made to Russia. They're commitments he's made to Iran. They're commitments he's made to China. They're commitments he's made to some of the countries that he's not even friendly with anymore. So how would somebody come into power and even go about managing the country as an independent state?
An independent state? What do you mean by independent state?
Well, we have seen in the past there are countries that become enslaved as debtors. Look at Greece, for example.
Yeah.
Excellent example. Greece is now basically a debt slave to Germany. So any person I mean, Maduro is in power for the time being, and we don't know until when. So he's basically made his country into Russia's pawn and China's pawn and Iran's pawn. And if somebody were to come to power, they would assume all that debt. It's not like you can just wave it off.
Right, right. Yeah, you can't wave it off. Well, it will be interesting because we know what the IMF handles situations like this, but we don't know how the Chinese government handles situations like this. We don't know how. Well, I don't know myself. I don't know if you know. I will gladly be open to hearing, but I don't know how the Chinese will respond in the case of a default. Because usually what China has done over the years in Venezuela is that they've gotten these contracts, uh, with the government that involve some type of oil exchange, uh, and some other things that have contracts where they will build, I don't know, they will build a train, but they will only hire Chinese people, so they won't hire anybody. You probably know this already. So that's what they do to expand their economy and incur debt. Now I don't know, right? We know what happened in Argentina, for example, in the early 2000s when they were defaulting basically, and we've seen what happened with debt that gets inflated. We've seen it in the was it in the Philippines? We saw it in the 70s, probably. I think it was 50s or 70s. We saw it a little bit in Ecuador in the 80s. Uh, you know, we've seen it across the globe, and one of the reasons why U.S. has so many bases around the world is that the bases become part of a restructure of some type of debt at some point, and then they say, well, it's fine, you don't have to pay that debt, but you've got to host one of our bases somewhere else. So that means that they're exchanging intelligence for money, right? Now, I don't know how the Chinese. It will be interesting to know. This is something interesting to know how the Chinese will react in case of a default. How will the Russians react in case of a default?
Well, again, with Zimbabwe, China did send a lot of their forces there, and they ended up converting a lot of their agricultural space, which was once used for wheat. And ironically, Zimbabwe has been in famines in the past. They were
Mm.
converting their wheat fields into tobacco fields because there's a lot of smokers in China, and
Ah,
they'd bring in Chinese workers to work those tobacco fields, and basically they suck Venezuela or Zimbabwe dry, using that type of de facto colonization.
right.
And who's to say? I mean, China. I don't think it's as, I don't know how to say whether it's as bad as colonialization, but it's definitely caused a lot of friction because Zimbabwe, until 1980, they were trying to fight for their independence and racial equality, which is uh, not something to trifle with. But yet, once they achieved it, this leader Mugabe, he was willing to do everything he could to sacrifice all those freedoms gained in order to hang on to power, similar to what Chavez did in many ways, and what Maduro continues to do. And with Russia, remember they've used their leverage around the world to build military bases in Syria and in there were rumors. In fact, I heard from somebody on Saturday who claimed that Venezuela could be the destination for a new naval base for Russia. Now,
Yeah,
is that something that's not understandable? No, I mean that's the way some of these global powers work. Do I want a Russian base here in the Western Hemisphere? I don't think so, but I mean, this is stuff you kind of you have to leave morality aside for a second. We've had forces over in Lithuania and places like that, American forces,
right.
for
Yeah,
however. I mean, Russia is not behaving irrationally. They're behaving as a Russian as a superpower would in a normal situation. But again, this is not towards the interests of the host country, in this case, Venezuela. In China's case, it was with Zimbabwe. And I think that they have much to lose from Russia having a base there, because Russia's interest after that would be to maintain at whatever cost any regime that would let them keep their forces there.
yeah, yep. That's right. That's interesting about the Chinese, how they did the tobacco thing. That's something that I would expect them to do.
Yeah, we're kind of, I think we're at a point where, there's not much positive you can expect to happen once all that freedom is removed. That's kind of why people like me, and there's people much more extreme than me in this vein, we say, well, any freedom that the government requests or demands for people to give up, you have to consider what the price for that is. If you're being told, well, you can't you can't speak certain words, you can't uh, have certain beliefs, you're already compromising the amount of room to work with that you have. And that goes, they're always talking about gun control. They're talking about issues of, uh, taxation right now. That's an issue that it keeps people with conservative economic viewpoints alive, because we have examples to look for in countries like yours, Venezuela, where we see how far they've gone to the extreme. Now I do want to take a look around the world. There's Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, who was such a booster for Venezuela in the past. Do you see? I don't know how much you follow people in the media covering Venezuela that are sympathetic. Do you think some of these people are reconsidering their position, or are they doubling down?
Well, Corbyn back off, backed off from his statement pro Venezuelan. I remember that statement like it was yesterday. He was asked again, and he kind of said no comment or something like that. So he already backed down into that statement. Again, we're talking about ideologies again, and we're talking about like a system of governments as a whole, instead of what does Corbyn stand for and what are his policies, and where in the world has those policies failed, where in the world has those policies succeeded, and where is he in the spectrum? Is he looking to try new things? Is he looking to emulate something else? Is that going to work? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. And going off the weeds and saying like, "Oh, you're fucking socialist. You don't know what you're talking about."
What I think this is where I have to disagree in terms of the issue here, in my opinion, is that there are people that are ideologically committed. I mean, on the left, I'd
Yeah.
say he is. I'd say Pat Robertson, for example, on the right, this Christian ideologue. You can't expect him to have power and not to abuse it in order to impose his beliefs. And I think that will be the same thing. I was watching yesterday, by the way, and I shared it with you, this interview with Abby Martin on Jimmy Dore's
Oh,
show.
yeah, I saw it.
And I think that there are people out there that, and I hope I don't do the same thing, and I try not to, that they're so committed to an idea that they're willing to spread blatant lies and sometimes mix the truth with the lies, and form some sort of Frankenstein monster out of it in order to achieve this sensational story. And she's one of them. For those of you who don't know, there's this network called Telesur in Venezuela. They have an English channel. This country that's impoverished, they have enough money to invest equity into a channel that they broadcast to America and the rest of the
Well,
English-speaking world.
well, they don't they
And
don't own they don't own the whole channel, but they do own the majority of it.
right, yeah,
It's
that's
it's
that's what I
it's
was.
divided it's
Yeah.
divided up into Ecuador, some in Argentina, some Bolivia, some Brazil. But yeah, Venezuela has the major stake on it.
Yeah, and they're able to invest money into this person, Abby Martin, and other people like her, in order to spread basically their perspective, which is fine. I mean, there's other countries that do that. We do that. We have a network. I think it's called the Voice of America. I think it's only radio though, and to spread our perspective around the world. Now the difference here, I think, is that she goes and tries to deceive Americans about what's happening in Venezuela. She'll show stores that appear to be full of stocked foods and things like that. How do you think? I mean, do you think these people are just too committed to the ideology, like we were talking? I mean, you and me, we can both agree. There's ideas that we both find that we prefer, but there's flaws in them. Do you think somebody like this, and I'm not just trying to single her out, that they've just put on the blinders so hard that they actually believe what they're doing and think that they're telling the truth?
Yeah, of course. Everybody has ideologies. I never say that there's no ideologies, but what I'm trying to say is that we as people receiving the speech, right, that they're saying something and we're processing what they mean. We have the obligation when we talk and also when we express our ideas to not get into the weeds of the ideology, because that at the end it's gonna get us nowhere. In the case of Abby Martin, in the case of other pundits, again, I do the same thing. I don't look. I mean, obviously she had an ideology, and she's pretty hard on that, and it's pretty sad at times. But again, I would say, okay, what is she for? Kind of, does she land in the U.S. policy? What does she want? What is she really looking for? And she's not gonna say it, and she's not gonna say it bit by bit, because all she does is sensationalize what she's saying, and that's what she does, and that's why people like her. But there's always going to be space for these sensationalists. I mean, we see that in both the left and the right. It's just what I'm saying is that it's a matter of the citizen, and this is not only in the U.S. but in the world. It's a matter of the citizen to look at it from a perspective of how is this concretely going to work, and why would it not work, and why would it work, and then we make those conversations, right? We have those conversations with people we care about. But if you only follow Abby Martin on anybody on TV, it's just bullshit. It's just nothing. There's nothing to be learned. So that's my point.
Yeah, I think that probably the person that I admire for his behavior in this sort of situation, because we've said enough negative things about Abby Martin, which I could do plenty, but Christopher Hitchens, he was a socialist. I'm not a socialist. He was an atheist. I'm not an atheist. He was very pro-union. I'm not pro-union, but he was always somebody who would report on. He was a reporter, and he would report things as he saw them, and he wouldn't shield people that he thought were being dishonest. And he's dead now. He died of cancer, I think 5 or 6 years ago. And I think it's a great loss for people who follow the news that we don't have him. We don't have people like him so much anymore. We just have a lot of people that are committed to, like, I could have done this broadcast. I could have said, fucking communists, they fuck their country up. They don't know how to run the oil industry. But the questions are more complex. I mean, if Maduro were to fall today, a person who comes in who has a libertarian ideology, it's no guarantee you would know how to manage the country.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a situation where you can just say, well, I'm going to put in this program that Milton Friedman wrote in 1981. Well, even if you could, it depends whether you're able to manage it. It's dependent on irrational things called human beings.
Going back to Venezuela and talking about management that you're talking about. Take a look at how many loans and how many debt was incurred during the early 2010s under Chavez. I mean, we were in a bonanza on oil, right? Where oil was what, 100 or something like that, and they were incurring debt. And what are they doing with the debt? Instead of investing, like you were saying earlier, on other areas, what they did is like, well, let's just spread it around and do some these social programs. And I'm saying like, look, man, I understand people need social programs because people are struggling, but like, at what cost? Is it? And those are the questions, right? Is it sustainable? Yes or no? Okay, what is the future of the economy? How is this going to affect the long term? What's going to happen when the oil prices go down? You know, those are the questions, right? And that transcends socialism or capitalism. That what you're talking about, and this is very true. That what this is talking about is about management. It's about how good are you managing the economy, and then from there you say, okay, you could be good managing the economy and at the same time have good social programs. Why not? I mean, it's just a matter of how you structure it, how you do it. It's about the nuance of things. So, yeah, management is a big deal.
So we have two final questions from the same person, a dictator who appears to have purged everybody else from the chat. Pinochet is asking, do they refine their own gas in Venezuela? I believe they do. That's correct,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And does China have any military in Venezuela?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Cuba does, though. Cuba for sure does. Cuba
Yeah,
has like actual people. I think I've seen. I don't know whether it was you or one of the other two guests who's told me that Cuba actually has a massive installation of personnel in the Sabin, which is the secret police.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I thought you were talking about Chinese in Cuba. No, no, no. Yes, Cuba, sure, for sure, proven, no question.
Yeah.
Highest ranks and military and intelligence gathering, no question. They are embedded into our military.
Yeah. Do you
And
think? Do you think I have a question? Like, do you think Venezuelans, like at the popular level, they have a resentment, whatever that may be, towards Cubans right now?
yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I don't talk to a wide range of ideology people. It's kind of on one sided. But for sure, I mean, well, the thing is this: it's funny because we're talking in the sense of an America, right? The resentment will be very different from what you would probably think about. I don't know, maybe it's more of a it's not a nationalistic resent, like kind of like, oh, why are you taking our jobs, kind of stuff. More like, what the heck are you
Nice
doing
South
here?
Park reference. Yeah.
But it's more like, what are you doing here, and how long are you gonna be here? That's kind of the resentment, like, why you need it, kind of stuff. But it's not like, get out of my country, kind of, American style, fucking, get the fuck out of here. But more like confusion and kind of like, what the heck? 'Cause kind of, what are you doing here? Well, why?
Well,
That's kind of.
Pinochet says that Milton Friedman saved my economy. Yeah, I've heard about that. I mean, it's not like he's wrong. Um, but he also says the Cubans know how to stop uprisings. I don't know if you know this, Carlos. Maybe you've read
Yeah,
about this because I know Cuba. What they did in the '80s was they intervened in Africa a lot.
yeah,
They put down rebellions or civil wars in Angola. And by the way, they may have been accomplices to the famine in Ethiopia because they were supporting the government there, which was deliberately starving many villagers. So they had troops there in the 80s. So yeah, I think he's correct in saying that. Well, I mean, we've been there here at it for an hour. How about last word? What do you think? Like the outlook is? There's elections. There's things going on. What do you think is like the next large event that's going to happen in Venezuela?
the opposition is gonna lose again. And I don't know. I think they're gonna keep defaulting in some payments, and they're probably gonna get away from with some of them. Uh, but yeah, it's very interesting. Let's circle back in a couple of weeks and see what happened.
Yeah, so that's about it. This was Ramon with Carlos Cordova, and maybe if they need help, at least they don't have Tom Perez running the
Fuck.
opposition there, because that would, you know,
All
not
right.
to pour salt in the wound. But this is Carlos Cordova. And I'm Ramon, and this is Bold Like a Leopard. Carlos does not have a website, so if you need to ask a question, I guess send it to me, and we'll bring it up in the next episode.
Yeah, sure.
And and have a great night. And I'll talk to you later, Carlos. I'm going out. I'm going off for the night. I'm gonna go eat something.
Sure. All right,
All
man.
right.
Take care.
Easy.